Hi everyone, in today's video I am going to be drawing this purple peony using colored pencils. You can see me getting started here on the outline for this drawing using Prismacolor, Polychromos, Derwent Lightfast, Derwent ChromaFlow, Holbein, and Luminance pencils. I used a lot of different brands here because each brand does not have very many options for these light pinks and purples that I needed for this drawing. So I drew from almost every brand that I own for this one, but that doesn't mean I used a lot of different pencils. For example, I only used one Holbein pencil and I think 2 Polychromos, but I mixed and matched so that I had all of the colors that I needed here. I started on the outer edge of the flower and worked my way in simply because I find it easier to work on the easiest parts of the drawing at the beginning. I don't like to jump right in on the hardest areas because I find that overwhelming, and I felt like these outer purple petals would be easier than all of those inner frilly light colored petals. So I started here, but you can definitely start in the center and work your way out. I was drawing on Legion Rising Museum Mount Board 2-ply, and I was drawing on a paper that was 20 by 20 inches, and my actual flower is about 13 to 14 inches across. So this is a fairly large piece, and I feel like that helped me be able to get lots of details in here. The larger you draw, in a lot of ways, the easier it is because details actually become shapes that you can pretty easily fill in. But it does take a lot longer, and in the end, this drawing took me over 50 hours. That's really the only drawback that I can see to drawing this size is the amount of time it takes. You have to be committed to spending the time on it. You can see me there just outlining that petal. I worked through these petals the way I work through most pieces, first by outlining, then by drawing in my shadows, then blocking in the highlights, and then filling everything in with the mid-tone colors. Then I blend with a solvent, and in this case I was using Utrecht Nude Odorless Paint Thinner. And once the solvent dries, I come back through and add my second layers of pencils, which in a lot of cases just involves going back over all of the colors in the same order, the shadows, the highlights, the midtones, and then I like to refine everything, make sure that all of my edges are really nice and clean, add any details. You saw me use a couple of tools here. I use an embossing tool at the beginning to add any indentations or little contour lines or veins that I want in the petal, and then I'm coming over later with the slice tool to help even out. The slice tool will pull up a little layer of pencil, and it's a very subtle effect, but it did help ease the transitions between the shadows and the highlights. And you can also use an electric eraser for a similar technique. There was a Lyra Rembrandt magenta pencil that I used quite a bit of in this drawing. Just noticed myself using that one there. Really beautiful pinks. The Derwent ChromaFlow line also has lots of really beautiful pinks and purples, and I used quite a few of those in this drawing as well. And when you need a sharp, clean edge, nothing beats those Polychromos. There you can see me using the Polychromos Violet, and I also used a Manganese Violet, which is lighter and a little bit warmer than the violet. These outer edges, it was sort of like on the left side of the drawing, I had these really nice deep jewel tone purples, and then on the right side of the flower there are more pinks and it's a lot brighter. You can tell that it's been lit from that direction. So in that case, I used more pinks and reddish undertones. For the shadow areas, in the deeper purple areas, I was using the Prismacolor Black Grape, but then where this is more reddish, like on this petal, I was using a Derwent Lightfast Purple, which is a really nice, deep, dark purple color, but it does tend to be a little bit more reddish once you blend it with the solvent. So that's how I was able to get those different variations in the shadows. And just working back and forth. I spent a lot of time refining these petals. I really wanted this to be a showcase piece. I wanted to make sure that I did my very best on it. And so I took a lot of time in the, when it was almost done, I would still spend another half an hour on it, trying to make it as perfect as possible. And now you can see me start to work on some of these inner petals. And these followed a similar pattern to the outside edges, where on the left side, everything was a bit more purple. And then as I moved toward the right side, I was drawing in more of those lighter pinks. You'll see me blending with a Q-tip a lot. Typically, I blend with a paintbrush when I'm using the solvent. But in this case, because there were so many tiny little details, so many different little crevices that I wanted to work that solvent into, I felt like these pointed tipped Q-tips were really helpful. They made it a lot easier to work the solvent up and right up to the edge without bleeding onto areas where I didn't want it to go. There's that embossing tool or stylus. When I use that, then when I come over with the pencils won't stick in the areas where I laid down the stylus, and then I can go over that and it creates these lines in there. And then when I blend out with the solvent, the pencil will settle down into those lines, but it'll be slightly different color, so you can still see them, but they're not near as drastic, which is what I actually want. So that's a really good, inexpensive tool to have. Really just sort of pulled out all the stops on this one. I drew from all the different techniques that I know of. One thing that I did not do for this drawing that I think would be helpful, lately I've been incorporating markers into my drawings, especially for these types of like lighter petals. And so I think a really light violet, maybe Copic marker would have been helpful here. Anytime I finish a piece, I really like to evaluate it and think, what would I do differently next time? And that's one of the things I would do differently. I would try to draw in some of the markers for these lighter petals. I think it would have made it easier. Kind of have to work that balance between loving your drawing and thinking it's perfect, and also being able to look at it critically and think, yeah, but what could I improve? And maybe it's not something you would improve to make it look better, but maybe to speed along the process or make the process easier. I think that's an important part of developing. Part of what made this drawing take so long, besides the extra effort I was putting into it, but all of these little frilly petals, they do just take so much time to work through and work around one by one. You can fill in like those larger outer petals, you can get those filled in fairly quickly, but all of the little bits really add up time-wise. But I think it's worth it in the end. And you can just work on these petals one by one. I think that's the best way to approach something like this. I almost think of it as it's like working a puzzle. What's the next petal that I'm going to work on? And I also, like I said at the beginning, start with something easy. Even within each petal, as you're getting started, think, what's something that I know for sure? Like, I know for sure I've got this shadow right here. Go ahead and draw that. It just gets you started, and then that will lead to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So something like this, again, can be very overwhelming, but just approach it one petal at a time, or one shape at a time, one shadow at a time, however it makes sense for you to look at it. And before you know it, you're going to be moving along. And I think that by drawing in some of the things that you know for sure, things that are easy to get drawn in, even if it's just the outline, for example, it narrows everything down and it makes those more challenging areas easier to focus on later. So I did create a 4-part tutorial series for this drawing over on Patreon. If you're interested in learning how to draw this yourself, I think it would be very helpful. There's an overview video, and then I have 3 separate videos, one focusing on the outer petals, one focusing on these frilly inner petals, and then one that's focusing just on the center. And I have a lot of footage on there, including quite a bit of real-time footage where I am just running the camera in real time and talking about exactly which pencils I'm using. And for those real-time sections, I really tried to focus on all of the different specific types of petals that you would need to know how to do in order to fill this in. But it is more of an advanced piece, and I'm labeling it as an advanced tutorial on Patreon. So it would be helpful if you have had some experience with colored pencils. And yeah, I have beginner tutorials as well. So if you want to draw this one, but you feel like you need to work up to it, you can go start with something a little easier. And you can find links to all of my tutorials in the description for this video. So getting closer to the center, and as I work toward the center, I'm pulling in even darker colors. I did want this very center to be quite a bit darker so that it would give volume and depth to the flower overall. It's really important to not be afraid to use some of those really dark colors in order to create that depth that you're going for. I wanted some contrast in the drawing, and I hope I achieved that. So I used the brightest whites and I used the darkest darks. Dahlia Purple from Prismacolor was another darker value that I relied on quite a bit. It's a really beautiful, one of my all-time favorite colored pencils. And just finishing up around the center. These final few petals were so much easier to work on because I had so much experience with working with these colors. I find that as the drawing goes along, I do tend to get faster because I know exactly which colors I want to lay down in which order. But I hope you love this drawing as much as I do. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions that I can answer, and I would be happy to do that for you. And otherwise, I will see you in the next video. Bye, everybody.